And joining us on the Rothman Orthopaedics guest line from Inquirer.com, Marcus Hayes. What's up, Marcus?
Hey, Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Are you settling in at home now? You're on the road a lot. You're traveling. You're bebopping all over the place. Now you're settling down a little bit.
Yeah, the last part of the month of May into probably July is when all the sports writers recharge from the spring training, Final Four, spring training again, Masters, and then if your winter teams are in the playoffs, that goes, if you're lucky, it goes into June. But the Sixers have kept me out of June for several years now.
Then you got the draft thrown in there too. It's all sorts of crazy stuff. Yeah, it's funny. The last few years with the Sixers, their playoff situation, more than a handful of times, with the exception of COVID, I have had to make sure I've had my passport because I'm about to travel out of the country and go, man, if the Sixers make it to the Eastern Conference Finals, I'm going to be screwed. And then they fall short, and I'm still disappointed nonetheless. But, Marcus, I wanted to have you on today because I read your article, and I will say it really makes you think. If you haven't seen it yet, check Marcus out on Twitter. Obviously, you can see this article. You can read this article, and it really makes you think because, Marcus, I've argued with my friends, family, other Sixers fans, many people about Joel Embiid, and I think that from where he started out to where he is now, becoming a father, as you point out in the article, as you and I have discussed before, becoming Arthur's dad has really made him mature at a very rapid pace. And I think he has kind of settled into more of that veteran role than we have ever seen him since becoming a dad. But your article points out a lot of flaws that he still has in his game to continue to grow.
Well, I found that him becoming a father set him up for success at coming out of fatherhood, coming out of like the worst of COVID. So 2020, 2021, I found him to be kind of a different guy. Okay, look, I'm going to get my rest. I'm going to eat better. He doesn't drink, allegedly. And he's got a fiance. So with him, it was just mostly sort of becoming a little bit more responsible at home. That was a big first step. The next step, I thought, was when he was injured in 2021, he fought through that because he wanted to win the MVP. He wanted to play as many games as he could, so he didn't take any games off, no load management. He played on a bad knee to chase the MVP, and he set himself up for success the next season because, he played 50, 51 games or whatever it was, and that just clearly wasn't enough last year. But this year I thought he played enough games, was the MVP, and that's kind of where his maturity stopped, though. There's another level of maturity. There's another level of responsibility. And that's what Shaq and Charles were talking about in 2019 when he missed a game because he had a virus and an upper respiratory infection against Toronto. They just could not conceive of missing a game because they felt sick. Now, both of these men, both Shaq and Charles, and I mentioned them because they're the halftime show, they're the post-game show, they're the arbiters, and they're big men whose team's offenses were built around, and defense too in Shaq's case. They could not conceive of letting an illness let down their team that way. And that's the thing that offended them most with Joel in Toronto. And yes, Joel Embiid this year played with a fractured orbital bone, and he played with a torn thumb ligament. That's wonderful. That's heroic. If he plays as hard as he can, if he stays in shape when he's healing from the orbital fracture and the concussion. He did not stay in shape. He was in horrendous shape when he showed up for games 3, 4, 5, and 6. And if you're playing, okay, you don't get graded on a my thumb hurts curve. You don't get graded on I wear a mask so I don't have peripheral vision curve. You get graded on did you play well or not. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, nobody's going to see an asterisk in his playoff stat line from 2021, 2022 saying, and he was a little bit hurt or he was gravely hurt or whatever. They're going to see that once again, he produced less in the playoffs than he did in the regular season, which is exactly the opposite of Tim Duncan, Shaq, and Hakeem Olajuwon, who are his comps.
Now, that's kind of where the article got me because when I'm watching him play in this second round series against the Heat and he's got the orbital bone fracture and you see his impact in games 2 and games 3 and 4, and then in 5, it looked like everyone just was done playing, everybody. And my thought was you're getting this leadership from Joel Embiid where he's trying to play through these injuries and nobody else is having his back. That's how I took it. You're saying this is more of a, I hate to go vanity, to use my word, vanity more so than it is trying to motivate a team?
No, I think he thinks he did the best he could. I don't think he realizes that there's another level that great players reach despite adversity, that real warriors, real heroes, they produce when they're wounded. And they produce. They don't say, I was wounded and I gave it my best shot. Mm-hmm. They say, I was wounded and I overcame. That's the difference in the legacies. And maybe he's just not that guy. That doesn't make him a bad guy, but getting, one of the things that Tobias Harris said, and it's funny, we're talking about Tobias Harris, who was probably the most polarizing Sixer outside of Ben Simmons over the last 4 or 5 years, not necessarily because he's done anything, but what he hasn't done and who he isn't. He's not Jimmy Butler, right?
Right.
So one of the things Tobias Harris said was, when we faced adversities this year, we sometimes let them get the better of us. He did not exclude Joel Embiid. Mm-hmm. I mean, George Niang played hurt, okay, in the semi. George Niang shot 50% from 3 in the first round. And we didn't talk about George Niang's knee. All we talked about was how hurt Joel Embiid was. Tobias's point, I think, is everybody's hurt. Everybody's got stuff going on. Joel might be more hurt, but that doesn't mean Joel shouldn't get down in the post. That doesn't mean he shouldn't run end to end. That doesn't mean he should stay upright. That doesn't mean he should be able to play at 80% effort. And that's the thing that was most damning. He said it'd be one thing if we played at 100% effort, but we didn't. And he did not exclude his center.
True, very true. From Tobias Harris, absolutely.
Let's be honest. Probably was the best Sixer in the playoffs.
He was certainly the most consistent. Absolutely.
That might be a whole different show. Is Tobias Harris the best version of Tobias Harris we will ever see right now, because he took it upon himself to play great defense at the cost of everything else against Pascal Siakam against the Raptors? Has he discovered something about himself? Maybe he's the leader he's talking about the Sixers need.
I felt for a long time that Tobias Harris was the leader in the locker room, even with Joel Embiid still becoming mature and Ben Simmons still. It felt like Tobias Harris was the more veteran voice in that room. Do you think that's still the case, or do you think it's all Joel Embiid now?
He was always the grown-up, but you cannot have a leader in the locker room when Joel Embiid exists and calls himself the process and talks about being the best player on the floor. Mm-hmm. You can't have someone like, if they had PJ Tucker, who's I think a great leader, Marcus Smart, who I think is a great leader, in that locker room, there would have been friction with Joel Embiid because he can't allow anyone else to be a leader, and he's not a very good leader himself. Leadership is about two things. Leadership is about setting an example as the best professional you can be. That's what Tobias Harris is. That's the kind of leadership he has. It also is not saying I'm the best player, so let's feed me and go off. What it is I'm the best player. I'm going to make you better. I'm going to improve you. I'm going to take care of all the little stuff, and you're going to be able to count on me. That's the opposite of what Joel Embiid does and is, and that's the thing that needs to change. He has to understand that he might be the most important person in the locker room, but that only means that he has to make everyone else feel and act and be important.
Understood. When it comes to his overall talent level, are you someone that did have him as the MVP or the runner-up or top 3? Where did you have Joel Embiid in terms of MVP?
I had him as the MVP last year. If you look back, I think it was Walton in the 70s played 50 games and won the MVP. Yeah. And that's my litmus test. If it happens once, it can happen again. But Nikola Jokic, if advanced metrics didn't exist, I don't think you would have the Nikola Jokic argument, because, Joel Embiid, it's not Joel Embiid's fault that 2 of Jokic's teammates were gone.
Right.
You can argue because 2 of his teammates were gone, his stats were inflated because he had to do more, which he was able to do and did it well. But you can't find me a general manager in the NBA who, everybody starts their team with Giannis, but then it's Joel, because Joel is a generational defensive player. He really is. And Jokic just isn't. He's not that good defensively, and he doesn't give you enough offensively to compensate for let's be honest, 35% of the game, 30% of the game, because that's what defense is. Rudy Gobert isn't worth what Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic are
Sure.
worth.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to the rest of this team, James Harden coming back, opting in for $47 million. Obviously, looks like Doc Rivers is coming back now as well. What does this team need? What do they need to do to make changes in order to try to finally get past that second round of the playoffs?
They need depth, and they need heart, and they need rebounding, and what they really need is the players you talked about to make a step. I don't think you're ever going to get a better version of Tobias Harris. There's a lot better version of Joel Embiid to be had out there. You need James Harden to be fit and healthy. He says his hamstring has bothered him for 2 full seasons, and those 2 seasons were seasons in transition with different teams. So, and you need, Tyrese Maxey to be consistent, to demand the ball, to be that third star, because they've got 3.5 if he becomes a star, because Tobias Harris is kind of an all-star. Tyrese Maxey needs to be a better defender. He needs to be a better decision maker, and he needs to command the ball more, and that amplifies everyone. They have a really good core. Those 4 guys are so good that you can afford to have Matisse Thybulle on the court, disrupting defensively. But it really doesn't matter what happens as far as depth goes, unless those 5 guys, 4 guys, I'll take Tobias out because I think he's where he needs to be, unless those 4 guys change and become different players. And Embiid's going to be 29 years old next year. Harden's going to be 33. We've seen players age gracefully and sort of change their game. We saw Michael Jordan change his game. There's no reason James Harden can't change his game to become a better, more invested defender and rebounder, and a better, more invested and efficient point guard. There's no reason. There's no reason Joel Embiid can't become more dominant defensively and on the boards. One of the big reasons he's not as dominant defensively and on the boards is because he's tired all the time, And, of course, Matisse Thybulle needs to develop a 3-ball. That's it. That's all he needs to do to become a 10-year starter in the NBA. And Tyrese Maxey needs to develop a mid-range jumper, not a runner, a jumper. And he needs to be able to defend on the perimeter efficiently. He doesn't need to be a great perimeter defender, but he can't be a pylon.
Mm-hmm. No, I would agree with that as well. Last thing for you, I'm confused by Doc Rivers coming back. I know there's a lot of money tied up, which should really sum up any confusion, or eliminate any confusion. But it just didn't seem like him and this locker room were meshing well at the end of this year. Were you surprised that Doc Rivers is making a return?
I'm surprised that Doc Rivers wants to come back. I'm not surprised that he's been retained. The people running the organization love names. Daryl Morey loves names. Josh Harris loves names. You're not going to get a bigger name in here who's a good coach than Doc Rivers. And Doc Rivers, if nothing else, he's a good coach. Maybe not a great coach. He's a good coach. I mean, the Mike D'Antoni, flirtation with me was always just ridiculous. Mike D'Antoni is probably the most overrated coach in the history of the NBA. And this is a team that needs to be better defensively and be a better rebounding team. That's the opposite of what Mike D'Antoni believes in. It's just that simple. So I'm not surprised that Doc was retained. I'm a little bit more surprised that Doc allowed himself to stay. And I was wrong about that. I thought Doc wanted out, and he probably could have gotten out. But, I'm thinking about writing a devil's advocate column next week that says if you subtract Doc's attitude and the 3 or 4 times where he's attacked the press and the fans, and you just clinically evaluate the job he did with the teams he's had, with Ben Simmons, who is a catastrophe 2 places now, with James Harden diminished by a hamstring and being incorporated into a team that was already here, and you subtracted 2 major parts. Doc Rivers didn't do a bad job absent his blow-ups with the media. He's very, very difficult to like right now, but you should be able to at least respect the job that he did just looking at the job. Mm-hmm. And, they lost a series. They played 33% of the series without their number 1 player. And they lost, 4 of those 6 games. And last year he had I don't mean this to be politically incorrect, but and it's going to sound bad, but he lost a series with a mental case playing point guard for him.
Mm-hmm.
A guy who is sent to become, a self-described mental case.
I mean, even at the end of that series, remember Ben Simmons said he needed to get his mental right.
Right. So all those things, if you want to blame Doc for putting Ben in that position, okay. If you want to say he misused James Harden and didn't utilize Joel Embiid well enough, fine. He had 25 games. They had 4 practices with James Harden set between the time he was acquired and the playoffs, and then they had 5 more. So they had 9 practices all year with James Harden. So I don't think Doc necessarily did a bad job as a coach as far as coaching the team goes. Could he have been better with us? Could he have been a better messenger? Could he have been? Did that affect the team? Those are all fair points and arguments as well. But I don't think Doc did anything to warrant his firing on the sideline.
Understood. Gotcha. Ladies and gentlemen, you got to read this article. It at least makes you think about Joel Embiid and the future of the 76ers as it hinges on him, his leadership, and his toughness as well. So make sure you check out this article written by our friend here, Marcus Hayes, Inquirer.com. Marcus, always great catching up with you, man. I really appreciate it. And again, Joel Embiid, I have looked at as a guy that has matured a lot, but this article has made me think about what his future holds if he doesn't take that next step forward.
We can all mature more, right?
So true. So true. Marcus Hayes, Inquirer.com, joining us on the Rothman Orthopaedics guest line. Thanks, Marcus.
My pleasure.